My video about the Japanese PM's statement went very well. It wasn't the highest number of views I've ever had, but it's still growing. And I'm happy to see the comment section where about 99% of the comments were positive. Some very serious and emotive stories of Japanese brutality were posted there by viewers with highly personal experiences, and I thank you for sharing them. Something else that was strange was that without a shadow of a doubt, this video gave me more comments than any other video I've made by a long way. Even when a video's gone to 100,000 views, it didn't get as many comments as this one did. So people are obviously concerned, but there were some comments that needed further explanation, and therefore a second video was needed. So here we are. Wherever you are, welcome to another of my takes on China. More about Japan, really. Now let's look at some of the main comments and then a couple of individual ones. One major problem a lot of Chinese people have, and this is reflected in the many comments about it, was that Japan has never apologized. Now there is a very good reason for this, and I'm not saying I agree, I don't, but it's valid if you're Japanese. The emperor is chosen by heaven to lead the country. Now, yes, I know they have a democracy now, and the emperor is not more than a figurehead. But like the UK, the king there has great power if he wishes to wield it. He rarely does, but when he does, it proves they are not just figureheads. Now, if you're not sure about that, Google the events leading up to the sacking of Australia's most popular Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam, G-O-U-G-H, Whitlam. A man who was trying to take Australia along a path that is very different to the one they're on now, and one which the USA disapproved of intensely. That's another story for another video. When the rape of Nanjing happened, the officer in command was a new commander. His name was Prince Yasuhiko Asaka. He was the uncle of the emperor by marriage and personally appointed on the 5th of December 1937 to command the troops that entered Nanjing a few days later. Now, for the Japanese to apologize for what happened there means they would need to acknowledge that the events were wrong or a mistake occurred and they shouldn't have done what they did. Now, this is where royalty gets in the way of putting things right. The Japanese must deny the entire event. It's become government policy because to admit it and apologize is to admit that the emperor was wrong and his mandate of heaven would be destroyed. Culturally, that would be disastrous. It would be the same as a Catholic telling the Pope that he's wrong on matters of spirituality. If the emperor can't be proven to be, or can be proven to be wrong, then the mandate of heaven is lost and his position becomes untenable. Why have a supreme leader given to you by heaven if they don't get it right? There's a serious danger that this would tear Japan's fragile society apart. That's why. Another one was many Chinese people would love to strike first, strike hard, and the matter would be resolved in a matter of days or even hours. And there's absolutely no doubt that China could do this very easily. However, they will not. First of all, it would be illegal. It would be a breach of the United Nations Charter. And what's worse, as far as most Chinese people, as well as most Chinese people are aware, it would make China equally as unlawful in its rogue behavior as the USA is. For the record, to all the people who suggested China should just nuke Japan, I do understand your reasoning, but I don't like it. I actually have many Japanese friends, and I'm sure people watching this also do. They're almost 100% nice people. The Japanese don't run the government. Democracy doesn't run any government either. It's like giving a kid a toy steering wheel in a car and the kid can pretend to drive it. That's the same amount of power that people in these Western democracies have over the control of the machine they live in. Absolutely none. Apart from that, currently Japan has no nuclear weapons, and its constitution prevents them at the moment from having any. Now, I know that Takaichi has indicated that this might happen in the future, but it won't happen until the constitution is amended, and that will take a referendum, not a vote in the parliament. So the chances of China hitting Japan with a nuke are absolutely zero. China is the only country in the world which has an unconditional no first strike policy, meaning that no country which doesn't already have a nuclear bomb and use it against China will ever need to fear a nuclear strike from China, something the US hasn't got, and something every country should fear, because the US is capable of doing this. And most of all, Japan, the only country in the world, is where it has done this. Now, with that in mind, the Japanese people would be and should be marching in the streets if they thought for a moment that America is going to be allowed to place nuclear bombs on their islands and make them a target. Because if the US does decide to go nuclear on China, then China is well within its rights to retaliate in kind, and that means Japan's nuclear weapons would become targets, even if they're under US control. However, as we know, democracy doesn't work well, so marching in the streets and protesting a government decision won't change what this woman wants to do. There's a strong possibility that she will get her way, and life in Asia will become a lot less stable and safe. Many people suggested that China should simply stop sending rare earth elements, REEs, to Japan, and that will contain their military buildup. And that's partially true. What China has actually already done is exactly that. If they were to ban them altogether, there would be a breach of the World Trade Organization rules. And once again, that's not something China does. While there have been many disputes in the WTO, I'm not aware of any time China has ever acted in breach of their rules. But there are, of course, allegations from one country that systematically does break their rules. Again, for China to do so would be illegal, and that would make them the same as the USA. So it won't happen. But like all countries, if Japan wants them, they need to prove that rare earth elements are for peaceful purposes. Let's just take a look at this in terms of a legal interpretation. Japan has a defense force, the Japanese Defense Force. It doesn't technically have an army, so until this statement was made by their prime minister and a suggestion of increased military spending up to NATO levels, which they announced they would do last year in September, Japan had a pacifist constitution, so China could send them all the rare earth elements they needed for peaceful purposes. But in 2015, Shinzo Abe and his parliament went against the wishes of the Japanese people and introduced a new law which allowed the prime minister, under the event of an existential threat, to overrule the constitution and allow an invasion of a country that they consider a threat. So in making her statement that she sees a Chinese invasion of Taiwan as a survival-threatening situation, using the same wording as the 2015 law, which gave Parliament the power to override the Constitution, this was a very serious threat to China. Takaichi has just effectively torn up the pacifist constitution, so now any sales of rare earth elements to Japan will need to be carefully monitored. Japan is such a huge industrial nation. It builds massive amounts of products which require rare earth elements. Now, I'd suggest that sales will slow to an almost standstill while paperwork is examined to ensure that the elements provided are going into washing machines, TVs, sound systems, cars, hair dryers, whatever else they go into, and not being diverted to military build-up projects. Now, unless Japan happens to have a stockpile, that will mean no more rare earth elements for their economy, which relies heavily on them to survive. However, we have to remember that Japan was the inventor of the just-in-time method of production. They don't stockpile very much, and I expect they have some shipments on the way which might make it there, but they won't be seeing any more shipments. Now, this is not China breaking any rules or laws. This is simply ensuring that Japan is complying with China's peaceful use laws. One person, called the Rainbow Snake, made a comment I thought worthy of a fuller reply. Rainbow Snake, he or she said, "I don't understand the reaction of the CCP. Takaichi just answered during question time to an opposition party that if China invades Taiwan by military aggression, what the Japanese standpoint is, and she answered, possibly exercise the right of collective self-defense. Just possible, depending on the situation. If this caused Japan's existential crisis, Japan is talking about defense, but China is talking about war. In response to that, the cut off Takaichi's head by a diplomat was shocked the world. China can live in the 1940s, but Japan is living in the 21st century, apparently. So my reply was simple. It's because you don't understand history, Rainbow Snake. I responded. I also asked the commenter to actually watch the video, because this is what I've just explained. China stepping towards the removal of its pacifist constitution. Takaichi's mentor, Abe, wrote that law and allowed the prime minister to override the constitution, and only if there was an existential crisis. What's the crisis? It's fairly clear here that there was no casual response. This is the same wording as the law, using this survival event for Japan. There is one being manufactured here. So this is not a simple case of a few words taken out of turn or context, which can be retracted and apologized for. This is a genuine first step towards militarization. And the last time that happened, millions of Chinese people died, and many more millions around the rest of Asia, including, no doubt, some of your elder generation, if you come from the UK, Holland, USA, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, or any one of 26 Asian nations, or many more places where people were tortured. China has never once called for war against Taiwan. Technically, it's still at war with the government of Taiwan, but not the people. It does not want and has never threatened war. It has only ever said it would defend Taiwan from being taken away. And this is appropriate under the UN Charter, as the UN recognized Taiwan is part of China, and there is but one China. If anyone interferes with that, as the US always does, and the Japanese PM, the elected leader of the former colonial masters and slave owners in modern times, is doing with this comment, then China is well within its rights under the UN to act. And that might mean military defense of its own land. Now, I finished with a parting word of advice to Rainbow Snake. Once you understand the history and the reasoning, and you have the knowledge to put them into a formative argument, I'll teach you how to spell CPC. I also got one great comment which helped me clarify matters in the video. I said that there had been 27 violent assaults on Chinese people in Japan in the space of a year, and that was true. One commentator called me out, and the fact that there had been 2 assaults on Japanese people in the last year. Now I'm going to read his exact words to you. Quote, this was, as usual, from an anonymous poster with the name GKUP6XZ or something. The quote starts here. 2 Japanese people were attacked in China, but there were 27 violent attacks against Chinese people in Japan. Question. My dear man, you are quite the propagandist. 2 Japanese people were murdered in China this year, and a 10-year-old boy was stabbed to death. Now, we can look at that and ask, what's the point of that? That's 2 violent offenses against Japanese people in China, and that's what I said during a period of time. I said that. So when I checked, I found out I was wrong. So here's my response to Mr. Anonymous. A Chinese bus driver actually died attempting to save the lives of a Japanese family attacked by a crazed Chinese man. But in that incident, neither of the Japanese people died. However, the 10-year-old boy who did die, that was in September last year. That's 14 months ago. Now, I said in the last year. The 2 Japanese men that this was describing were in June of this year, and as far as I can ascertain, they are the only deaths or assaults in China of Japanese people due to violence. The perpetrator was arrested and charged. The matter was a business dispute. Asahi.com reports that the event happened in April of 2024, but most other reports suggest it happened in May of this year, 2025. Interestingly, the assailant, and Mr. Yuan, although he is Chinese, is also a long-term resident of Japan and a business partner of the 2 victims. He probably thought he had a better chance of getting away with this in China, but he was arrested the next day after the event and he awaits sentencing. My guess, he'll be executed. Either way, I went on. Thank you for the correction. there has actually only been one violent assault on Japanese people in the last 12, in fact 14 months. Also interesting was that it happened in Dalian. The city was once named Port Arthur and is the scene of a violent and aggressive invasion by Japan in 1890, where they took the city from Russian troops who were occupying it at the time. Now, as a result of that invasion, the US gave them the Treaty of Shimonoseki. And as a result of that unfair treaty, the US gave Taiwan to the Japanese in 1895, proving my point that China has every reason to fear Japan's military resurgence. So thanks for pointing that out and adding to the value of the story. Facts do matter. Thanks once again for watching my take on China. I look forward to more great exposures with you soon. See you next time.